All right. So, guys, we might get cracking again. And we're going to just, for those that were here before, you're going to hear it again, but we'll probably got about 20 minutes or so left on engagement. And then we'll break into groups for about 5 minutes and just have some reflections on our own experiences and come back into the group and have a chat about that for about 5 minutes. And then we'll move on to the juicy stuff, the planning, which everyone will have a view on. And Brett will see a few of his projects featured in there. So he'll be able to pull me up if I'm saying something wrong. That's not right. So, okay. Let's go. You're good.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep, ready to go. Okay, so it's important when you're first having your first consultation, starting with why, also knowing that you may need to start with why every time you start the meeting, just giving everyone a little recap on why you're actually there. For most community groups that you'll be negotiating with or engaging with about your project, this might be the first time they're hearing about what a planning scheme is. I know it was for GMY, so it's important to go in there knowing that you're giving them all the information, but precise information and being clear. You also need to make sure that there's no assumptions and that all ideas are welcome, and that you also explain what the scheme does and what it doesn't do. We had to make sure that we did that with our project particularly as well, to make sure that what it can deliver them and what it can't. And we'll give you some examples of that shortly. And making sure we've covered this already. Don't use jargons, be clear and be relatable. And then also link back to how it might actually affect cultural interests and on the ground, so activities on the ground, and be clear that the scheme sort of sits above the tenure as well, and that any development obviously is separate to that. So I think that's all I have to say there, Josh. Now, these are the examples. So the examples being what planning is and then what planning isn't. So probably the one that stands out for us in our project is about creating a long-term vision and legacy that aligns with the aspirations for country for providing economic, social, environmental, cultural outcomes for the GMY people and the wider Yarrabah community. But it's also important to distinguish, because one element of our project is about architectural design and what housing might look like, is to ensure people that while we're looking at housing design and creating some plans, we're not actually developing the land as such as this group of people. That will be something that will come later, and that will be something that they will do. It's really just providing them an instrument to be able to do that. So it's really understanding what it is and what it isn't, and being clear to everyone as well, so that they can actively and participate and engage in the process and make informed decisions.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I also found that through engagement, it was really important to explain to people that a planning scheme and planning can help to protect the valuable features that are really
Absolutely
important to those people. Give an extra layer of assistance to to really reinforce the value and the importance of those features.
Definitely. Now, for more techniques around messaging, we also have to be clear about the impacts on the culture, environment, and the economic aspirations and the tenure. And then also be very clear about how the input and the engagement will be used, and at what steps throughout the process, and how that information is going to inform the process and the end outcome. And then ensure that you use common language. So don't be too formal. So you can say mob, country, traditional owner, that sort of thing. And then everyone can be given an opportunity to have a say and voice their concerns. So make sure that you give everyone that opportunity to do that. And you can be clear about that in the beginning of your conversation as well, as the meeting opens in housekeeping. Or also, every time you open a meeting, please always acknowledge the traditional owners of the country. And even if you're Zooming, always acknowledge the traditional owners as well, like we did today. That's really important. Now, this is I think we're on to the next slide.
Yep, just what I would add to that as well, again, what I would add to that as well is that really think about the so what kind of factors. So what will be in it for those people? So what does it mean for them? Why do they care, or why should they care about this? And one of those things might be being clear that a planning scheme won't affect the rights that they already have. A planning scheme is about helping to complement those rights and to help them realise the outcomes that they want to achieve. Because one of the key drivers and fears is, well, what is this going to do to our rights? We've fought so hard for 20 years or whatever to get native title. What does this now mean?
Definitely. So this image is an example of some of the key messages from our master plan, so the GMY example, and these formed part of our engagement strategy and underpin our communication strategy with the community and the GMY people and our stakeholders. So these messages were developed with our board and with Josh as well and Ethos Urban, and they're a combination of our organisational and cultural requirements, as well as they're sort of project centric to the GMY project specifically. And then we'll show you another example, one of the extra steps that the board have taken so that there's a bit of a separation between the directors and also the community, so that there's more people actually involved in engagement and communication with this particular project as well.
Yeah.
More inclusive approach, I'd say.
Absolutely. And this sits in the strategy for engagement. This isn't part of the plan itself. And it kind of underpins the excuse the pun, but the ethos and the approach for how we addressed engagement. There were non-negotiable elements in there. There was kind of clarity around who was doing what and what, distilling what was really important to that project. And it gave us a bit of a Bible to refer back to.
And then we also have some guidance around what's critical to the success of your project. So it's really important that you provide positive messages for your project while ensuring that your messages are consistent. And while people may not be able to attend all of the meetings, it's making sure that you can still make time to talk to them, whether it be by phone or other methods that they may prefer. It's also important to gain trust of the community as well, and ensure that, and a way to do that would be providing feedback through updates. So those newsletters that we provide every time we call a meeting, we include an update of the projects that are like a newsletter and give people an opportunity to provide comment, and they also know how to provide comment back to us if they're unable to attend the meeting. Also advising on what not to discuss and current affairs, and making the project relatable to them and their country, and showing them, sort of aligning it to their vision and aspirations as well, potentially. It's different. Obviously, we're the proponent for our project, so it might be very different when you're actually working and engaged by another proponent to deliver planning aspirations. And then establishing trust and managing that conflict. So these are sort of the tools that will assist you to actually engage with your community about your project.
And I think an important way that you can help build, that relationship and the trust is trying, when Helen talked about it before about your timing and around your visit and how long you stay in community, where you can try and build rapport and having a presence so that you're not just flying in, flying straight out. That doesn't there's no opportunity there for people to get to know you. I suppose a good way to people to help them relate to you is when you introduce yourself. So when I introduced myself this morning, I told you who I was, where I came from, some of my family connections. That also helps people break down some barriers as they understand a bit more and they want to know a bit about you, your family, where you come from. And they'll try and see if they can find a common connection, whether it's a common place, went to school. This is a very small world. Queensland is very small. There's normally, you're able to find some sort of connection or commonality with most people that you meet. So that's what they will be looking for. That's why it's important when you introduce yourself, to provide some of that background. That's also a good way to help build trust with the community.
Yeah. And or if you've got experience working with other groups too, you can say that I've worked up in whatever area, or I've been working with this mob and we've done a similar project. And then they're like, and they know that's a commonality connection.
Yeah, I think the other thing is each of the points that Helen's run through, project champions can take that on. So, they're the ones that really help stitch all these pieces of the puzzle together. and they should be the first port of call and the first resource that you get in on a project where you need to work with Indigenous people.
Which I think leads into our next example of how we've actually developed that for our project. Is that the next slide, Josh? Yes. So something that we have developed with the GMY Master Plan is an advisory committee, which is identified representatives from each of the 3 language groups. So the board, when we had our consultations, on their agenda was actually for the groups to identify 2 representatives from each of the language groups that would then be able to participate in sort of field trips with consultants if they need to go out on country, like with our fire expert, for example, for them to sort of champion the project and assist with getting people to community meetings. And we have also allowed some money within our budget to actually engage them and remunerate them for their participation to basically help guide that project as well. But they will assist with, reducing conflict and those sorts of things as well. But it's a backup, but it's also, for us, it was separating so that the board weren't seen like they were always the ones making decisions, that we actually had a group of champions that on the closer to the ground to be able to then consult with community and get that messaging out to people as well. What else can we say on that? Yeah, that's basically it. Keeping it visual. So we've got some examples of some cool maps that we've used for our project as well. So we could probably go to that one next, Josh, and that sort of relates to. So using visual prompts like we have here, you can see on the image as well. So very big maps that we've used, I have mentioned earlier, using the keys and the legends, making sure everything's really clear and relatable. And then we've got some more images of some maps next. Now, not everyone has one of these. So I think this may be the only one in the state, but this is a 3D map that is very useful for our particular project to actually talk about country and visualize country. It's a really good tool. It's been really beneficial with our master plan project, but I appreciate not everyone has access to a 3D map. Next.
That process was really useful as well because it got the community involved, so all the school kids and a number of different people involved in making that.
Yeah.
So,
that was another WETMA funded initiative, which we're very grateful for, and they've won awards for that map. It's pretty incredible, but it's also used for tourism and a whole range of other aspects of work now. Now, this photo is a photo of where to hold and recommendations about holding your meetings and engagements. So don't feel like you're bound to be holding a meeting in walls in a community hall. It's good to be out on country under the trees. And at this particular day, we were scattered all over, under buildings and outside underneath trees and things like that. So highly recommend where you can engage on country under trees. We now even hold our board meetings at the beach at Gilgee under a tree. It's just much nicer and you sort of get better engagement as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Giving people a space where they feel comfortable is really important. And often that's in the building. So somewhere familiar or somewhere of their choosing. So, through this process, it was the rangers and GMY that said, oh, look, it'd be best to do it at the ranger base outside. There was a fire going. People could come and go as they please. And because it was a non-structured environment, it really helped to facilitate people's willingness to share information. So you can see the really big A1 or AO maps there with a clear overlay, and getting people just to write down whatever they thought, if it was one thing, if it was 10 things, whatever they wanted, really helped us to then understand spatially how things work, and it also helped because people think spatially about those outcomes.
And some of the questions we were asking, so asking informative questions, so running like even just about how the weather and the water and where the rain flow goes and what's a seasonal creek and what they know as the landscape that floods, and then matching that knowledge with the science. So then it's like those constraints actually match what the engineers are saying as well, and or and that extra level. So yes, we know there's landslips in this area, or we know this area is prone to fire, or this area is prone to, or this is what the area looked like, and now we've got rainforest encroachment, things like that. It's like what the maps are saying and what some of the imagery is saying from the desktop is not what actually is happening on the ground as well. So it's really that on the ground perspective is so crucial and valuable to projects. It's like the ground truthing of the science and the mapping. Okay, tips and tricks, what to do, what not to do. Next slide. Okay, so it's important to understand too that there's a different social structure for decision making in your communities. So depending on who you're engaging with, so just be mindful of that it's different wherever you may go. So it's important to identify that and establish what that process is, who can speak on behalf of the group, and how decisions are actually going to be made will make your engagement process much more successful. And also be aware of meeting fatigue. Be mindful that you're not the only person going in to engage with community. There's so many other departments. You've got health and education and, a whole range of other infrastructure development happening in communities. So be aware that yours is not the only meeting that people are attending. Evening meetings, we don't recommend. Most people work and then spend time with their families. So you need to sort of work within business hours. Use trusted contacts, so your PBCs and or your champions to help facilitate your meetings. It's always important to wear appropriate attire, so smart casual, no short dresses or skirts or revealing clothes as well. So making sure, high tops and things like that as well is also really important, and that will help build that relationship with community as well. And not high heels, don't wear high heels, flat shoes.
Don't wear high heels. Yeah, but he also said to me, no short shorts, because you might get the aunties all steamed and hot and bothered, and you don't want that. So that's always important to make sure you...
And just be mindful how you're seated as well and things like that. And then the value of drawing maps, obviously we've already covered that. It's very significant. Sharing knowledge and building capacity of the group as well. It will build their confidence to participate and engage, and different avenues throughout the project as well. Always allow plenty of time for discussion and breaks. Breaks are really important. So make sure, and it might even help you to set out when you're breaking, but stick to the break sessions on the board where you've got your parking lot, and then you've got your little bit of a structure and run sheet of how the meeting is going to run, so that people understand that you'll have time to go out for a smoke, and you'll have time to have morning tea and go to the toilet and things like that.
And I suppose it's important just to keep an eye on the room as well. Like if you can see people tuning out and disengaging, that's, even though it may be a bit, it's time for a break.
Time for a break. Yes. Yes.
I was just going to add on to about the timing. It's good to understand each group. So I have a group that will only meet on weekends because they all work during the day. And we've, recently had to try and squeeze in a meeting with a proponent who couldn't meet on a weekend to try and do it. A Zoom call after hours makes people very cranky. When they've got to come home from work and then get on a Zoom call because someone's not being respectful of their time. When they make time on their weekends, when they meet to be able to do business. So it's understanding, how each of the groups work and their preferred way and times of meeting as well.
That's right. Yeah. So again, going back to that social structure for decision making and meetings, because the groups that we're working with are not weekends at the moment. So it's very different for every community. So you've just got to be mindful of that, and being prepared to use traditional language names for sites. And if groups referring to areas, so on mapping and within your documentation as well as referring to the traditional name for those sites. And then also asking how the mob would like to be referred to. So if there's a general term, or if it's GMY or Gunganju MY, whatever, sometimes there's abbreviated version. So it's just understanding what that is before you go into your meeting as well.
Yeah, a bugbear of Cassie's that I learnt the hard way as well is, even though the government likes to use the term Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and ATSI, it usually doesn't go down very well, does it?
No, I don't like it. I don't know a lot of groups who really don't like it. And it does get their back up a little bit. Especially, it's understandable if you've used it in drafting in as short form. I said, but when people turn up and start calling you ATSI people, really pisses people off, because that's not at all how we identify ourselves. So do not ever use that phrase. Most of the time, by calling them the name of their group. So, you know, whatever the name of the claim or their language, if you know what it is, that's a good name to be using because it shows your respect, you know, for them as a community and their laws and customs as well. It's respecting their identity.
Definitely. So this is our last, I think we're up to almost our last slide. So this is to wrap up, and then we've got some questions and engagement breakout. So this is when to engage. So I've got next slide. And this is just basically a summary of what we've covered today. So it's important to engage early on in the process when you know, and also if you're formulating a budget, you need to make sure that you include your budget for engagement early on. You need to make sure that you have ongoing engagement. So it's not just a tick and flick that you just have to go in and tick the consultation box. That won't get you any brownie points in community. So you need to make sure that you have ongoing engagement. And if it's a long-term project, then sometimes these projects can take up to 3 to 5 years for ongoing planning matters. Yarrabah, for example, was 9 years. And we're still now going through our master plan process. So consider also establishing the reference group as a vehicle, like we have the advisory committee group as well as the board. So each have different functions and throughout the engagement process. Plenty of lead-in time, and also be flexible when you're actually notifying of consultation meetings and or field trips. So people need to know so they can organise if they need to take time off work, etc., or look after kids. Be mindful too that there's other consultation processes happening. Like I mentioned, that you're not the only one that's engaging with community. But in saying that, if you want to be smart, you may be able to cost share meetings and engagements. So PBCs and organisations, land councils, to assist with meeting fatigue. You can see if they've got any other consultations that are scheduled for other projects that might only be half a day, that you can then slot into the afternoon session or the morning session if you want to then cut or, you know, halve some of your expenses for engagement, that you then may be able to share those costs by sharing the engagement with another proponent or the land council or PBC if they're talking about other business is another option for you. And then also being considerate and aware of any internal meetings and activities to enable groups to participate in the planning process and have meaningful engagement. I think that's probably the biggest thing for us, is about meaningful engagement, and also be open again to know that you may have a deadline to get from here to here, but sometimes things will go like this for us. And it's also keeping an open mind, and projects evolve. And I think one of the exciting things about the GMY example and our opportunity is that we're innovating in a space that no one has innovated before, and we're providing an opportunity to enable other groups to create their own vision and aspirations for country by following this process. So it's an example. It may not be the same example for everyone, but it's really looking at how we can create best practice so that people can learn from our learnings and then apply a similar model perhaps for their country. So for us, it's exciting and innovating, it's evolving. So keep an open mind. Don't go in with sort of blinkers on and saying the planning laws only let you do this. It's about keeping an open mind to say, well, this is legislation, but now we're actually influencing policy change for fire in Queensland about vegetation permits and things. So by keeping an open mind, we're actually going to influence and have a far greater outcome than what we ever imagined was possible in the initial sort of parameters of our project. And I think that's it, Josh.
Yes. So now we're going to break into groups and do a very quick exercise. Hopefully Mitch is there. But these are the questions. So you get split into 2 groups. Helen and Cassie will take a group each, and I'll float in between. But really what we want you guys to discuss is really about what your experiences of engaging with Indigenous people are. And if you haven't done any engagement before, why is that? What might prevent you from doing that engagement? And if you haven't engaged, the next 2 questions probably aren't that relevant. So what we want you to do in that instance is just think about what might assist you to engage in the future and how that might work. You know, what kind of tools you need, what out of this session you would take to help in that. And if you have engaged with them before, we're keen for you to share your learnings on what worked and what didn't work. And also, you know, if someone hasn't done this before, what are your learnings and your top tips? And then linking into that as well as what do you see as some of the challenges with engaging? Okay, do we have
Thank you, everyone.
one speaker from me just to give a quick summary of what you guys all found? That would be great. So we'll start with group one.
Pick me. From our group, for the first question, which was about experiences, there wasn't a lot of experience within the group. Most people were here to learn what we should or shouldn't be doing and how to go about it. For those that did have a bit of experience, things that worked well, being flexible, multiple methods of communication and adapting, and maybe more verbal than written or, to communicate. It was interesting, we had Vishnu in our group who is from the university, and he was saying that the university takes students to North Stradbroke for maybe a week to be on country. Biggest challenge was before coming here, we were unaware of what to do and how to do it. So that's now enlightened a lot of us. And the takeaway was for the challenges that, being able to facilitate discussions with consultants. So from a council background, being able to be that middle person and know what's happening and how to grow those relationships. The meaningful process and outcomes. The main thing that came out of that from our discussion was that there was definitely consensus to build the relationships and maintain them in a way moving forward into the future. So not just for today, but, thinking ahead as well. So that was about it. Did anyone else have anything to add? We covered everything.
I'm good.
How good. Okay, group two, have you got a spokesperson?
Yes, I offered to be the spokesperson, and I don't think I've got my notes in anywhere near as much order as Catherine seemed to have then. So I particularly didn't write down what the questions were that we were answering, which makes this hard.
Don't worry about it.
I think some of in terms of experience, there was a few different experiences amongst the group, from coming in at the end of consultation to being there from the beginning. Some of the things that we talked about in assisting in that process were being open and upfront through the consultation process. I think I mentioned as well, like compared to how it might have been 15, 20 years ago, one of the advantages now is it's much easier to find the right people to talk to than it was, particularly back before there'd been a lot of determinations. And there was also some talk about, a lot more resources being available now to assist, such as the learnings everyone's getting out of today. One of the issues we talked about was just having an appropriate understanding of the legislation and frameworks. In terms of reaching meaningful outcomes, there was some discussion about being involved from the start to the finish. And in terms of some of the challenges faced, I think that the main topic of conversation there was the timing, and particularly whether you're working within government or the private sector, you're always under a lot of pressures, often around timing, which can be difficult to meet while also engaging in a meaningful way.
That's always a challenge, that's for sure. So I think that's a particularly big one, is balancing that respectful communication and building that relationship with a time frame that's ticking effectively, and deadlines and responses that are required. Not everyone, or very few, have the luxury of not having a hard deadline. Okay, well, look, that sounds good. Thanks very much for that, guys. Is there anything that anyone else wants to add before I go to the last component? Right. Okay.
So I say I might just add we did talk about the importance of we talked about having community champions, but it's also just as important as having internal champions for within council or other organisations to make sure there is that conduit of information about going backwards and forwards between the group as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Stakeholder engagement, definitely. Relationships has helped our project. Council, when we started, didn't have a relationship, and now we've actually got a really good relationship. But that takes time.